began talking last Sunday about this concept of prevailing faith. Prevailing faith is not a plain, ordinary, uneventful, boring kind of a faith. Prevailing faith is not usually exercised by plain, ordinary, uneventful, boring, mediocre Christians. Prevailing is an exciting faith. It's an extraordinary faith. It is an unusual faith. It is a faith with no limits and no borders. It is a faith that has no doubts nor uncertainties. It is a faith that has no fears, reservations, or hesitations. Prevailing faith is mountain-moving faith. Prevailing faith is sick-healing faith. It is challenge-taking faith. Prevailing faith is dead-raising faith. It is battling faith. And what I am desperately trying to get across to you good people in this series of sermons is simply that God intended that we church-going Christians should be living victorious lives when we leave church on the basis of the fact that we are exercising prevailing faith on a daily basis. So what we learned last week is that the enemy wants to distract us with intimidation and fear tactics. But God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. We learned last week that the enemy wants us to stoop to his level and follow his rules and plans for our lives. The enemy wants us ultimately to act like him. But you are of God, little children, and greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. Prevailing faith develops when you are in the will of God. I ain't got enough of y'all woke yet. Prevailing faith develops when you are in the will of God. Now, you need to understand now what the will of God is. The will of God is always what God has designed or designated or assigned or created you to be. God has a specific and a unique design or assignment for every single one of us. God does not expect me to try to be like you or you to try to be like me. That's why when he created us, he gave all of us deoxyribonucleic acid, that's DNA, so that we would have our own individuality, so that he could use me through my personality and he could use you through your personality. That's why all of us ought to always be comfortable in our own skin. You never have to feel intimidated by what anybody else says or does, because God created you also in his image and in his likeness, and he also will empower you to be whatever it is that he wants you to be. You don't have to try to be like somebody else. Now, this only works effectively if you're in the habit of obeying God's commands. Brother John, this is where we're going to have some trouble. Everybody wants to be in the will of God, but everybody doesn't want to obey him. There's no way you can be in the will of God and not obey him. Oh, I'm walking with the Lord. No, there's no way you can be in the will of God and not obey him. I've been walking with the Lord a long time. No way you can be in the will of God and not obey him. People don't like to obey. We don't even like the term. I'm going to tell y'all a secret. Secret to being blessed beyond your wildest imagination. Well, I'm already blessed. I know that. The fact that you're here today says you're blessed. Everybody in the building is blessed. I'm talking about a prevailing faith kind of blessing. I'm talking about one that goes above and beyond what you're accustomed to. The secret to being blessed beyond your wildest imagination is being in the will of God. It's being and doing what God designed you to be and do, which means it's more than you just showing up and sitting in a pew. About 12 people clapped on that one. You are designed to have a relationship with God, and God has implanted a specific and unique gift for you to use for the building of his kingdom here on earth. He did not send his son to suffer, bleed, and die on Calvary's cross so that you could get dressed up and sit in church on Sunday morning. Obedience to God is the key, and you can't be obedient to God without his word. Don't sleep with folks unless you're married. That's his law. That's his rule. That ain't my rule. Don't marry folks that are not saved and bearing fruit of righteousness. That's his law. Don't cheat on the person you married. That's his law. Don't lie, cheat, and steal. Don't judge other people as though you don't have issues yourself. Be kind to one another. Encourage one another. Watch your mouth. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. When people hurt you, let God handle the revenge. Be a student of his word. Be more than a church member. Be a disciple. Come to church. Worship and praise him. Pray without ceasing. Learn how to forgive and let it go. Don't be a hypocrite. Give as God has blessed you. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse. Watch out for the poor. Use your spiritual gifts faithfully. That's what God said we're supposed to do. Now, the challenge is this. When you are being tested and tried, when you are being, not if you get tested and tried. Because if you're going to be in the will of God, it ain't if, it's when. When you get tested. The challenge is not to misinterpret what's happening. The challenge is to stay in God's will, to stay into him. Because it's very easy to run . I said it's very easy to run. It's easy to run. Anybody can run. First sign of trouble. It's easy to run. That's the easiest thing to do. That's natural. You see something going on, run. Matter of fact, sometimes that's a smart thing to do. But when you are being developed, and when you are developing prevailing faith, and when you are learning to be in the will of God, and when you are learning to obey him, when it gets rough, when it doesn't feel good, when it doesn't feel comfortable, when everybody's not happy with you, when you seem like your friends left, y'all hear what I'm trying to tell you? The challenge is to stay in the will of God. It's easy to run when places and people and predicaments get uncomfortable. Now here's the problem. You don't know that the places, the job, the neighborhood, the school, you don't know that the places, you don't know that the people, family, friends, co-workers, church folks, you don't know that places, people, and predicaments, conflicts, arguments, disagreements, misunderstandings, you don't know. You are given no advance warning. You are given no heads up. Nobody warned you about what's happening. But places, people, and predicaments are working together, even though they are uncomfortable, to make you better than what you are now. So the key not to run when things get uncomfortable. See, that's why so many people can be in church for years and still pretty much act like babies. They can be in church for years. They old as the pew. They old as the building. They old as the stained glass. They old as the carpet. They old as the bathrooms. I mean, they just old. They just been around a long time. And they still have not grown. They still negative. They still whine. They still complain. Still ain't never happy with nothing. You never see any joy in their lives. They're not being fruitful. They're pretty much only running people. You don't see much growth out of them because they have misinterpreted and misdefined what a problem really is. And so you die as an old baby. An old baby. Why? Because we misinterpret, misdefine the challenge, and it is a challenge to exist and abide in the will of God. It is a challenge to hang in there in difficult, uncomfortable places. But they misdefine the challenge, and they start calling it a problem rather than an opportunity. And notice how God has David to end up on the battlefield, but he arrives with bread and cheese in his hand. He didn't come to the battlefield with armor and weapons because he didn't come to fight. He came to feed. God has a way of designing your mission in such a way that while you were doing one thing in obedience to him, it's positioning you for something else. God will often take us away from that familiar comfort zone to a place that we have no other choice but to depend on him. Abraham was told to leave his country and go to a place that he knew not of. Noah was told to take his family on board an ark, a place where he had absolutely no control. Nehemiah had to leave the comfortable confines of the palace to go build a wall in the hood amid local opposition. Gideon had to dismiss much of his army, major battle coming on ahead. Peter left the safety of a boat, stepped out on the water in the middle of a storm to walk on turbulent waters. The disciples had to get in a boat in the middle of a storm with a hole in the bottom of it. Joseph had to leave the comfort of being his father's favorite son and wearing preferred clothes to putting on the clothes of a slave and living in a foreign land. Jesus was rich, but he became poor that we through his poverty might be made rich. You will have to leave the comfortable confines, your comfort zone, if you're going to be in the will of God. Prevailing faith can withstand. Now, y'all pay close and write this down. Prevailing faith can withstand attacks from within and without. I'm telling you, you're going to need this later. Prevailing faith, see, this is why some church folk can't handle it when folk talk about them. They saying, oh, I can't, you're supposed to be church. Give me a break. People are people. I don't care if they're church people or not. You go off the deep end because somebody said something or what somebody's saying about somebody. I could care less about, how do you make it 17 years worried about somebody talking about you? I'm trying to tell you. 17 years folk been talking about me. I could care less about what folks say about me. Because it's not you that keeps me. If God didn't want me here, he would have moved me on a long time ago. It's not me that keeps you. If God didn't want you here, he didn't move you on. So why do we get so wrapped up and messed up over something somebody said? That's what happens with the Philistines and the Israelite army. The Philistines said something and the army fell apart. You can't fall apart just because somebody said something about you. Don't give them that kind of power over you. Most of the people that's talking about you are jealous of you anyhow. Just know that. And that you are only where you are because you are in the will of God and you have been obedient to his word. They don't understand that the more yielded you are to God, the greater ability there is for God to use you mightily. They don't understand that. When you are exercising prevailing faith, there will always be others. There will always be other people who will misinterpret and misunderstand and misdefine your faith and dismiss your faith as foolish. What's a kid doing out here in the first place? The main reason they are prone to misinterpretation is because they walk by sight rather than by faith. And because they only walk by sight, they will never be able to see what you see. They will never be able to see what you see because seeing what you see requires insight, not eyesight. And insight is a characteristic of prevailing faith.